them.
Oh, that's great.
I think either tomorrow or the next day.
That makes a big difference. Hey, Marty. and welcome. We're back here again, and we are gathering this morning in our chapel. As we know, Swedenborgians have gathered for over 100 years, always at this holy time of 11 a.m. But this morning we're gathering slightly differently, as I think a lot of you know. This morning's service is a part of what we are calling a new Church Jubilee Year, which we are taking as an intentional time to explore, to wonder, to challenge and to consider how we are being called to be a truly new church. After being forced to embrace so much change over these past few years through the COVID-19 pandemic, we're taking a stand this year to stay in the rift that this pandemic has created. To not hustle back into the familiar patterns of before, but to take time, take a whole year in fact, to stay with the uncertainty and to consider what new possibilities may emerge from within it. Now, of course, I can't tell you very clearly what staying in the rift is going to look like. That's kind of the point of uncertainty. But this morning I want to tell you some of what has emerged so far. First, in preparation for our service today, one of the things I'm doing this year, and I'm going to be inviting us all to do this year, is to take a bit of a break from the liturgies and the language that we are used to using that assume a certain understanding. Our tradition is grounded in the vision of Emanuel Swedenborg, and it declares that there is a new church coming into the world that would be unrecognizable to the historic Christian church. So in this way, we are taking a break from using so much language and liturgy from that traditional Christianity. As we hold language and liturgy lightly, we will still gather, of course, to pray, to connect, to reach out, to listen, and to learn together. And it might feel complicated sometimes, but maybe it will be beautiful too. This morning we have a particularly beautiful complication in that we are going to be sharing in one of the central sacraments of the church, the Holy Supper, the communion meal. This is a meal that is tightly held by language and liturgy. It is a sacred meal that in our tradition can only be performed by an ordained minister like myself. But at the same time, this is a meal, like the meals that we prepare every day for ourselves and our families. So I welcome you this morning into the fray, into the holiness of this sacred time and space and this sacred sharing. I welcome you into this hour and pray that you will allow yourself to be here fully, even if what happens is a bit unfamiliar, maybe even at times uncomfortable. You've made the choice to take this time apart from your daily activities, presumably because of a desire to feel, perhaps to understand, or maybe to express your connection to something greater than yourself, to connect with this new church that is coming into being. So may we, in our time together this morning, be shown the way together. So to begin our gathering, we're going to start by reading a couple passages from the scriptures that tell us about where this sacred meal comes from. So let us turn to our holy word, which is open on our altar. Our first reading comes from the book of Exodus, chapter 12, verses 37 through 42. The Israelites set out on foot from Ramses to Succoth. There were about 600,000 men, not counting women and children. A large number of other people and many sheep, goats, and cattle also went with them. They baked unleavened bread from the dough that they had brought out of Egypt, for they had been driven out of Egypt so suddenly that they did not have time to get their food ready or to prepare leavened loaves. The Israelites had lived in Egypt for 430 years. On the day the 430 years ended, all the tribes of the Lord's people left Egypt. It was a night when the Lord kept watch to bring them out of Egypt. This same night is dedicated to the Lord for all time, to come as a night when the Israelites must keep watch. So that reading sets the stage for the tradition of the Passover meal, which is where we find ourselves when we turn to our New Testament reading from the Gospel of Matthew. And here we hear the story of that Last Supper that we will be celebrating this morning. On the first day of the festival of unleavened bread, the disciples came to Jesus and asked him, "Where do you want us to get the Passover meal ready for you?" "Go to a certain man in the city," he said to them, "and tell him, 'The teacher says, my hour has come. My disciples and I will celebrate the Passover at your house.'" The disciples did as Jesus had told them and prepared the Passover meal. When it was evening, Jesus and the 12 disciples sat down to eat. During the meal, Jesus said, "I tell you, one of you will betray me." The disciples were very upset and began to ask him one after the other, "Surely, Lord, you don't mean me?" Jesus answered, "One who dips his bread in the dish with me will betray me. The Son of Man will die as the scriptures say he will. But how terrible for that man who will betray the Son of Man. It would have been better for that man if he had never been born." Judas, the traitor, spoke up. "Surely, teacher, you don't mean me?" he asked. Jesus answered, "So you say." While they were eating, Jesus took a piece of bread. He gave a prayer of thanks. He broke it and he gave it to his disciples. "Take and eat," he said. "This is my body." Then he took a cup, he gave thanks to God, and he gave it to them. "Drink it, all of you," he said. "This is my blood, which seals God's covenant. My blood poured out for many for the forgiveness of sins. I tell you, I will never again drink this wine until the day I drink the new wine with you in my Father's kingdom." Then they sang a hymn and went out to the Mount of Olives. This ends our readings from the scriptures. And now I want to share a short passage from Emanuel Swedenborg's Arcana Celestia, number 2187. What it meant by the eating of the Holy Supper is namely communication, or to be conjoined and to appropriate to oneself the bread or the wine, or love and wisdom, and to make it our own through our moment-to-moment actions. At this time in our service, I want to make space for us to share in some prayer, to take some time in silence to offer up our prayers to God, open up our ears and our hearts to possibly listen for inspiration. And there is so much, I'm sure, that is weighing on all of our hearts this day. So before we come into prayer, does anyone have anything particular that you'd like to lift up for us to hold with you in prayer this morning? Anything in particular, or anyone in particular that you're thinking of today? This is why I like silence, because sometimes there's just too much to name. All right. Well, what I'd like to read to begin our time of centering is a short meditation. And then we'll just take a minute or two in silence to let our prayers come to us and to see what we wish to say and also to hear what God is calling us to hear. So let us come into a time of prayer and meditation, starting with these words. Into every life come moments when sound slips to silence, when motion slows to pantomime, when the hard reality of this life blurs into the softer outline of the sacred. What is holy is not distant, but imminent. What you reach for in prayer is already in the palm of your hand. We are not mystics on a lonely summit, but common laborers in the fields of wonder. Feel the presence of the Spirit in the room where we are sitting. Feel the energy of the Spirit moving around you. You have dual citizenship in the land of earth and heaven, being both now and coming to be, being made of mud and stardust, being a child who is so soon an elder. Let us take this time in prayer. O Creator of life, O source of every blessing, hear the prayers we offer this day. May we know that they have true substance and connect us with one another in the intricate bonds of human community. May we trust and know that those who are suffering and in need are connected to us, and that our prayers of blessing and hope and healing have purpose and meaning. And may we be lifted up even beyond the bounds of this external reality, to know that the source of love itself is real and keeps us bound together as one family, one human family, one family of this earth. May we leave from this time knowing that our prayers are heard and have meaning and purpose. May we continue to pray and continue to receive the prayers of others. Amen. Sometimes wish that we could have time of prayer that is silent, but then also times of prayer which is yelling and screaming. Silence is powerful because it holds everything. It holds all sounds. It holds all words. But I know personally sometimes my prayers need to be vocalized. Maybe we'll experiment with that one week. The words that I shared with you in our time of centering meditation come from a man named Stephen Charleston, who I've come to be exposed to recently, and who I get the sense shares my desire for a new church and is seeing and believing that something new is coming into the world. He's an interesting figure. He's an Episcopal priest. He served as the Bishop of Alaska for the Episcopal Church for quite some time, and he's also an indigenous elder, a member of the Choctaw Nation. So talk about holding difference, holding structure and confusion. And he wrote this beautiful book, Ladder of Light. And I want to begin my reflection this morning with another passage from his work. He writes, "We need to achieve balance, the common sense spiritual equilibrium that allows people to celebrate a personal faith while living into a communal vision. Rather than standing in the darkness squabbling over our politics and religion, we could be climbing together to find shared solutions. Native American tradition and history show us that it is not only possible, but relatively simple. It is easy as saying a single invocation. I believe we are all the same." When I first read those words, I believe we are all the same, I was brought to tears. Tears because of the depth of this simple truth, living up against the layers of distinctions that we have built up between us, that have been encrusted and hardened over years of use. Layers of distinction that have allowed us to love not with this simple acceptance of our common humanity, but with complicated falsity that would convince us that we all live in a complex matrix of hierarchy where nothing about us is the same. Where our worthiness, our humanness, our acceptability is judged by a million external markers. The way we dress, our skin color, the job positions we hold, our hometown, our sexual identity, our age, whether we carry an iPhone or an Android phone, our education, our wealth. We could list things all morning. Yes, these differences exist, surely. They are real ways in which we are each totally unique from one another. But our faith would tell us that none of these distinctions elevate or lower our worthiness as receivers of life. That all of those external markers that we use to judge and to orient ourselves as to who is okay and who is not okay are false, earthly appearances that get in the way of us remembering that we share a common origin and a common destination, and that we are all made of the same substance, that truly we are all the same. We share so much in common. Hearts that beat in our chest, breath that enters and exits our lungs, only to be shared and move through the trees of the forest and the person breathing next to us. We all need to eat, to be nourished by food that is available to us because it is a part of this earth home of ours, created alongside and in this web of creation. All of us, all of the natural world, all of us are a part of one another. We know this as a theological declaration, and now with the mysteries of science, we know this with scientific certainty, that we are all of the same substance. I cry when I read these words, "we are all the same," out of sadness and fury and pure disbelief that we have become so incredibly alienated from the simple realities of life. Built up such complex ideas of distinction that keep us so separate from each other, keep us always constantly measuring who is more and who is less. Now, these distinctions come through all kinds of sources, and the church's history is a part of those distinctions. There's a quote that's been circling social media lately by Jean-Jacques Rousseau that fits in this setting. This is from his discourse on the origin of inequality. He writes, "The first person who, having enclosed a plot of land, took it into his head to say, 'This is mine,' and found people simple enough to believe him, was the true founder of civil society. What crimes, wars, murders, what miseries and horrors would the human race have been spared had someone pulled up the stakes or filled in the ditch and cried out to his fellow men, 'Do not listen to this impostor. You are lost if you forgot that the fruits of the earth belong to all, and the earth to no one.'" Now, this quote frames, perhaps too simply, but effectively, the problem. We are all the same, and yet we live in a society that creates many distinctions, a society that is actually only functional if we honor those distinctions. We may share a common desire to live and to thrive and to raise our children. We may profess a belief in the equality of all human beings, and yet we live in our tribes. We live with that impulse to survive that often motivates us to fear the other and to dominate and control. There is that human impulse in all of us, that if we don't grab it, someone else will, to believe that it's us or them. Of course, we can shift our perspective, and the history of religious traditions has often been an attempt to shift our perspective, to remember that we are born naked and we will die naked, that we come from the earth and we will return to it, that our land and our homes and our things are impermanent, transient forms of matter that will disintegrate back into the earth as well. When we remember this, all the striving can feel a bit ridiculous. I have to admit that at times it starts to look like the world we live in is not so different from Swedenborg's descriptions of spirits in hell, fixated on counting their coins over and over again, believing themselves to be surrounded by wealth, when in fact it is just dust, just nothingness, just an illusion. Now, Swedenborg makes the point that it is not the wealth or or the material possessions that are the problem. I am certainly not advocating that we leave our beautiful chapel or we abandon all that we have. The problem instead is our fixation, our attachment to this wealth, and these material possessions as being what is real and what is of value instead of the uses that they can perform. This is what's really important, and this is where we learn so much from the Buddhist tradition, as it truly does come down to attachment. Our attachment to wealth, really our attachment to everything. When we step back and remember that we are all the same, that everything is the same, of the same substance, then we can see that all the forms that this substance takes in their vast varieties are just forms, just appearances, changing and permanent appearances that can be used to bless or used to curse, that can be sources of nourishment and love, or cages to entrap us and keep us enslaved to our own selfishness. When we become attached to the trappings of this world, when we become identified with it, we lose touch with ourselves and with one another. We lose touch with the divine spark which is permanent and unchanging, that which animates and sustains life, that brings any and all of the joy of living to be. The invitation of the spiritual life is to be in the world, but not of it. To use our gifts, whether they be talents, wealth, relationships, property, to bless others, to celebrate life for the joy and love of it all. Because the stuff of life, while impermanent and ever-changing, is in fact vital to our existence. And hence we come back again to our meal. We cannot shun the world entirely. We must hold it lightly, and we must share it, but we also must use it. It is true that today in the world, the stuff of life is not equally shared in a way where we are all blessed. It is true that in the world as it exists today, many of us are very attached with the things that we have and the things that we don't have. We are not so connected to that divine spark that we trust that we are enough, that we are a being flowing with the fuel of life, enabled to be a blessing to others. But instead, we are often trapped in fearing that we are not enough and clinging to these external markers to prove ourselves. This is the state of things in the world. It has perhaps always been the state of things, and some may say it will always be the state of things. But in the world today, carrying this crazy, big, beautiful declaration that a new church is coming to be, we know that as the population expands, we know that we depend on each other. It is now actually almost in our self-interest to care about other people. It doesn't just have to come from a divine, selfless intent. COVID has showed us how much we affect each other and about how much the well-being of others affects our own well-being. This is about the soil of the earth. This is about caring for the environment that we all must share if we are to persist. This may not be the state of things now, but this is the state of things that must be if a new heaven and a new earth are to come into the world. And this is at the heart of our call to be a part of the new church. Jesus proclaimed this vision thousands of years ago. He proclaimed the reality that we are all the same. He saw the importance, he knew the truth, that the kingdom of God is at hand right now, and that this kingdom of God is beyond and within and much bigger than any of the external distinctions we might hold about who is holy and who is not. He ate with tax collectors and prostitutes. In that first sharing of the Holy Supper, Jesus served Judas, who he knew would betray him. This sacrament that today is regularly cordoned off only for those who are true believers, who are right with the church, was originally a meal between Jesus and his lot of imperfect friends. Those who sought to love him but didn't really truly understand him, certainly didn't profess any unified belief in who he was. Those who would let him down. And Jesus knew all of this, and yet he shared freely this first meal. This first meal was not about being in or out, good or bad, holy or profane. This was about showing up at the table and receiving. When we think about the blocks that keep us from knowing and holding the truth that we are all the same, we know that the church has been a part of that history. The Christian church, in its many different permutations, has gotten so far, very far away from this first meal. Within our Swedenborg tradition, while more recently we have sought to offer a very wide welcome at the table, we too carry our own challenging history of creating boundaries and barriers around this meal. Some of that is grounded in what Swedenborg shares about the Holy Supper and how he speaks about the importance of our worthily approaching it. It's so interesting how words become fixed forms that could then go far beyond likely the original intent of the writer. We know Swedenborg really was concerned about our inner experience, our intentions, and that makes a lot of sense. A sacrament, something holy that we are experiencing together, the eating of bread and wine only becomes something more when we experience it as more, when we approach it worthily. But we all know how worthily can become misused. So much trouble ensues from this statement in practice that I imagine Swedenborg would never have intended. At its core, Swedenborg is pointing out the importance of intention. That these sacramental acts only truly have meaning if they have meaning within us. But when we take this statement and put it through the ringer of our many earthly biases, now there's something else we have to be worthy of. And how do we determine our worthiness? And more dangerously, how do we determine others' worthiness? It was the tradition here, and I imagine it still is in many other new churches, to celebrate the sacrament of communion only a couple times a year, because of this understanding that we should do a serious self-examination before we receive the sacrament. In that intention, again, there is nothing inherently wrong. And yet, how do you ever know when you're done? How do you ever know when you've shunned all the evils that you can so that you can be ready to worthily approach this meal? Perhaps this was a healthy rhythm for some. For those who were able to do this self-examination from a place of love, seeing themselves as already beloved children of God, perhaps this wasn't harmful. But I'm afraid that for many, or most, getting into our minds the idea that we of ourselves could ever become worthy, could do enough to purge ourselves of our imperfections, our limited thinking, our confused ideas, that this could create, I know for me, someone who thinks too much, this could create a whole lot of stress and strain. And also it allows for some false hubris for those of the community who are willing to say, yes, I have, through my efforts, become worthy. Even with a full 3 months of preparation, could we get there? Could we be fully worthy to approach this sacred meal? spiritual walk requires effort, but more than anything, it requires reception. And that's why this is the central sacrament of the Christian church. We all need to eat. The act of hospitality is inviting others to the table, sharing the meal. And when we invite someone into our home to share a meal, we do not expect them to have prepared, to become worthy. We do not expect them to profess a certain belief, to hold a certain ideal or membership. We invite them to the table because they are human and they are hungry, and we have something to share. The invitation to share in the Holy Supper, the bread and the wine, while these are Christian symbols that speak to a particular tradition, this meal is common for all. As Archbishop Desmond Tutu makes the point of saying, Jesus was not a Christian. These early disciples were not Christian. These were Jewish men. This sacrament became something for the Christian church in the way that we have practiced it. But the way that Jesus practiced it was to invite everyone. Everyone has to eat. And eating is a holy act. When we participate in this sacrament and when we remember the holiness of taking in the elements of bread and wine, we are acknowledging the great mystery, the mystery of the spiritual life that often requires just a simple willingness to come to the table, just a simple willingness to receive what is offered and to give what we have. We have made it hugely complicated. We have created huge distinctions very much around this sacred meal. But at its heart, it's simply the dinner table. It is a dinner table that reminds us of our common humanity. It is a table that should bring us all together as hospitality does, and not set us apart. And so I pray that in that vein, we will be able to celebrate in this sacrament today. So as I prepare the meal, first I'm going to actually ask that we pass our offering plate. Would you play the song one time just to get ready? Thank you. We'll take up our offering for the work of the church if you'd like to give a financial gift or just consider what you bring to this church and this place. And then after we've taken our offering, we will then share in the meal. We ask blessings on these gifts that they may be put to good use for the work of the new church. Amen. So this holy meal that we are preparing to celebrate this morning, we celebrate in remembrance. We celebrate in remembrance first of those long ago, those Israelites, who were enslaved in Egypt for over 400 years, who when freed had no time to wait for their loaves to rise, but had to leave quickly in the night with the hope for a better life, with hope for freedom for themselves and their children. We remember this exodus of the past, and we also dedicate this meal to the exoduses of today that continue to occur. We think especially of the millions of Ukrainians on the move, having left their homes also quickly, not in a chosen exodus of freedom, but expelled by war and destruction beyond their control. This holy meal that we celebrate in remembrance of this man, Jesus, this man who understood and felt and lived from the fullness of the divine love that inhabited him. This man who would call us out to see that the kingdom of God is at hand, now in our midst, in the midst of the mess, in the midst of the everything, in the midst of all beings and all life. We celebrate in remembrance of his last week on earth, his last meal with his friends, his beloved friends, his imperfect friends. We celebrate this meal that we might remember that in our imperfection, we too share the divine light. That as we face tragedy and uncertainty, as we carry on knowing not where, we are fed. We are still fed. We are still here. And we are being provided for. Our physical bodies are being provided for from the fruits of the earth. Our spiritual bodies are being provided for by the fruits of heaven, by a constant inflow from a source beyond ourselves, a source not of human design, a source that embodies all love and truth, all mystery and beauty. In sharing this meal, we seek to connect with this love that shone forth through the life of Jesus in his complete and radical love and acceptance. In sharing this meal, we seek to bring our full selves to the table. We have been created to live, and living requires constant receiving of life from the external elements that nourish us and the internal influx that enlivens us. In this sacrament, we acknowledge and honor this reception. In the act of coming to the table, we acknowledge our part in receiving. Everyone needs to eat, and every part of us is called to be here and to accept this nourishment. Those aspects of ourselves that we revere, those aspects of ourselves that we don't understand, those aspects of ourselves where we feel shame. Let us bring our full selves to the table because we have been invited, because the meal is prepared, and we are called to come to the table and to bring others along with us to make sure that all people are fed. On the night before Jesus was betrayed, he sat at the table with his friends, his imperfect lot of friends. And he took bread, and he blessed it. And he broke it. And he gave it to them and said, "Take, eat, all of you. This is my body given for you. This is the very substance of my being. And now it will be the substance of your being. This bread is life. This bread is the divine love." And he took the cup of wine that he was drinking, and he gave thanks. And he gave it to them and said, "Drink, drink. This is the cup of salvation given for you, that you may be saved. This wine is my lifeblood. It is what enlivens me, and it will be what will enliven you. Even as I prepare to die, my blood, my life will continue through you. Because we are all connected. We are all the same. This wine is the divine wisdom that is always taking new forms, but will never die. Friends, this is the body of Christ, the bread of heaven. This is simple, unleavened bread that nourished the Israelites as they escaped from Egypt. This is grain and water from the earth. This is simple food. This is simple love, the ground of life, the ground of our connection to one another. Take and eat. Jesus assures us that whoever comes to him, whoever receives the divine love, shall never hunger. We have wine here, and we also have apple cider. I apologize, I still have not found grape juice. But this, friends, is the cup of salvation, the lifeblood, the divine wisdom that flows through all of creation, that flows through our bodies and our lives. This wine and juice is made with the physical fruits of the earth, fruits grown by another through stages that are now here to bless and nourish us. When we drink this, we are completing a cycle. We are taking in the earth and all its cycles. And then we are invited into a new cycle, fueled with the divine truth that will lead us to our own. Spiritual regeneration, there it is. That we might be of use and a blessing to others and to all of creation. And so I invite you to take and drink. Jesus shared this cup that we all might know, always know, that when we share in this cup with him, when we take the step to receive and drink in the blessings of life, we acknowledge the true gift that life is, and in doing so, we will never thirst. Having shared in this meal, let us take a minute to digest. to digest these physical elements and also to digest all that we have received spiritually. May we know that we are worthy of this gift. Well, friends, I'm glad we've been able to gather this morning. I hope that you've been spiritually nourished. We won't be gathering again until Easter Sunday, so that'll be in 2 weeks. There will be some opportunities these next 2 weeks to gather, though, in some different ways. And I know I've been saying that a lot and you haven't gotten the information yet, but I promise this is the week that it will come. I'll be sending out information on how you can connect in some different ways. I'm hoping that we'll be able to, even though we won't be worshiping on Palm Sunday, find some ways to really connect more deeply with Holy Week and the experience that leads up to our Easter celebrations. We also do have our in-person Taizé service this coming Tuesday at 7:30, if you're able to join us for that. It's a wonderful worship opportunity to add into your routine. It's at 7:30 here at the chapel, and that service, just like all our services, is also live streamed and accessible on our website, so you can always check in that way if you prefer. Does anyone else have other announcements that they'd like to share? Questions? Comments? Yes? Jesus was a blessing too? Is that what you said? Yeah, he was such a blessing. We're so lucky to have known his story so we can keep telling it. Well, and if you have thoughts on our Easter celebration, we are, trying new things, doing some new things. If there's ways you'd like to contribute to that service with flowers or food or maybe some kind of a children's pageant, we might think about that. We'd love to help make that a really celebratory morning. I know I could use some celebration. And we want to really honor the resurrection in a new way this year. So stay in touch with me if you have any thoughts about Easter celebrating. And after our service today, if you have time to stay for some fellowship, I know there's coffee brewing, and it would be lovely to be able to connect in that way. So a closing blessing before we hear our postlude and end our worship this morning. May you go forth from this space nourished and filled. May you know that you are just as important to the workings of creation, just as vital to the divine life as the great seers of old, the wildflowers that are germinating under the earth, and the builders and doers of today. May you feel that fullness, the gift of your own being, whether you are in a state of flowering, of sprouting, of breaking open, or of bursting forth. And may your light help others to find their way. Amen.
How are you doing?
How are you?
Oh, I can't complain. We're actually closing on a house on Good Friday, so it's a little bit interesting, a little bit busy. So we will be here on Easter Day.
Good.
Good.
That's
Yeah.
nice.
We'll do something around the Concord.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, we're really looking forward to it. It's interesting. You feel like you're sort of taking a step backwards in the sense that you're now all of a sudden.
You're back.
Well, I mean, you're worrying about sort of the basic things of life on a lower level again. All of a sudden, you know, where today you just call a maintenance man. You know.
Oh.
So, yeah, I'm.
Big change, big change.
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah, I mean, sometimes I forget.
Hopefully we can have some good.
I'll chase you down eventually. Yeah, I'm okay, you know. Getting a little bit better every day. I can walk without the crutch, but I use it more like moral support.
Oh, are you a princess?
Back in my basketball days,
Yeah,
I always
you know.
wore a brace on my knee, partly because
Oh,
I felt like I needed it, but it's
What
almost
is
like
it? Let's see.
Yeah, it's,
Oh, you're a
right.
dancer.
But sometimes, you know,
Yeah,
also strong walk, continue walking. If it's there.
oh yeah, the back there. Yeah.
Like now I can walk from the house to Howard Square, which is good.
It's a 10-minute walk.
Yeah, oh yeah. So it's coming slowly. So eventually, I don't know. I have to do it maybe without this, but I don't know. It's more for me, for the mentally, if you do it without.
Yeah, it's good to see you.
Yeah.
Can you stick around or?
Yeah, I don't know where it is. Are we going downstairs or?
Let's go to the parlor. I'll see you in there.
Okay, thanks.
Help keep channel.
Hi, how are you? Well, yeah, I'm okay. I'm getting better and better.
Good. Recovering from
Yeah, I had back surgery. You know, they had like, you know, my sacrum had a couple of fractures.
Oh,
And
okay.
they cemented it. About 5 months. So, you know, it takes time, but hopefully it can get better.
Yeah. Doing the PT.
Yeah. So also you have to make the effort of trying to exercise every day. I have to exercise every day to keep certain things to do. Sometimes I feel too lazy to eat.
Yeah.
But thank God things are good.
Yes, that is good. It's good. You know, she's gotten through the spring now, so it's easier to walk and, you know, walk places and go places.